Thank you for joining us. My name is Nich Weinheimer. Before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. It's your first webinar. You are in listen-only mode. You do have the ability to submit questions via the Q&A button in the control panel. We will follow up after the webinar. We have a slightly different format in terms of the mix audience, so please feel free to send those through. If you are having issues with your sound, you can access the audio via your phone as well as your computer's mic and speakers, which you are probably already using. And you can download the slides from the toolbar. Otherwise, we will be following up, sharing the slides and a link to the recording via email in the next 24 hours. So dispensed with the housekeeping, moving on. As I said, I'm Nich Weinheimer. I lead strategy at Skai, and I'm joined by Josh Dreller. Josh,
Hey,
hi.
how you doing? I'm senior director of content marketing here at Sky, and looking forward to diving into trends with you and kind of figure out what they mean. Also, if you do like this research, oh, sorry, Nick, stepping on
No,
your
no
toe.
worries. Yeah, we'll get to our research in a second. If you're not familiar with Sky, we are the only omni-channel platform for major walled garden media for performance advertising. So our platform over the better part of 2 decades has helped advertisers, agencies, brands plan, forecast, execute, measure across the most important digital walled gardens. And our index, and as many of you are familiar with, has a lot of scale to it. And you'll hear a little bit more about our research and that scale from Josh.
Correct. As I was saying, if you like our research, and I'm so excited about it, sometimes I do jump in pretty quickly, but there's a lot more that can be had on the Sky site at our research center. So things like this, the quarterly trends report, we also put out trends monthly. It's good to kind of stay on top of the benchmarks, compare what's going on with your peers against your own performance. We do consumer surveys throughout the year. You might have seen our Prime Day surveys, our surveys on walled garden and usage, kind of take the temperature of what's going on in the consumer's mind. We also have some really great marketer insight and studies that we do. For example, our state of retail media. Now, this year, our fourth annual, the longest running survey of retail media marketers will be out very soon. And we do custom research. We have a giant data set, as you're about to learn. And we can do custom research if that is something you'd like. All right, let's talk about today's data. Um, Large data set of our client. Remember, this is Sky client data across our various publishers that we work with: Google, Microsoft, Amazon, others. Over 1 trillion impressions and 14 billion clicks and $8.6 billion in spending flowed through our platform over the last 5 quarters. And that's the data set: 15 consecutive months of spending. All the client data that you will see here, these are clients that have been with us for at least the full 15 months of this analysis. And like I said, this is Sky client data only. Results may vary. You may see something different on your side, but we do have a good variety of publishers from around the world, different sectors. So we feel it's a pretty good representative data set of what's going on out there. And that's been validated over the last many years that we've been doing this analysis.
All right, thanks, Josh. So in terms of an agenda today, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the quarterly trends report. It's been, gosh, maybe a decade where Chris Costello was doing it. So I'll pour out a special measurement cocktail to our good friend Chris. We wish him the best in his next endeavors. So we appreciate you guys as we pick this up and iterate on how we release our trends. So today we'll go over some key findings across the broad industry that we cover. We'll dive into the kind of broad channel analysis, beginning with retail media. We'll jump into paid search and paid social, and then wrap things up. And as mentioned, please feel free to drop in questions, and we will follow up with that, as well as be in touch via email. So let's get started. So across the board, we've seen some stabilization in pricing across the major kind of walled garden ad channels that we support: retail media, paid search, paid social. Retail media definitely led the charge with strong 20% growth in 4Q, really due to a surge in click volume. And across the board between paid social and paid search, we've seen kind of very flat growth in terms of click volume, basically leading to minimal overall changes in spending. And we'll get into some of the details that underpin that, as well as what comprise our data relative to potentially some of the broader consensus you might see in the street from these enormous advertising platforms.
And so let's dive quickly first into the main top line number, which everyone's interested in, which is spending growth. As you can see here, we show retail media, paid search, and the paid social channel. The colors go from Q1 of 2024 all the way to Q4 of 2024. No big surprise, retail media continues its meteoric growth as it just chugs away and chugs away. And we're going to see this for some time, maybe even longer than we saw the acceleration of even paid search and paid social as that channel matures. In terms of paid search and paid social, we saw flat, relatively flat year-over-year growth. And that's to be expected of mature channels like paid search and paid social. Paid search over 20 years now, almost 25 years. Paid social more than 15 years old. Marketers know what to do. They know what to expect. They know how much they're going to spend. So this is kind of things that we see with mature channels and what we expect to see.
Thanks, Josh. And I think what helps as you think about our platform, we do mention in the opening information about us, we are a performance-oriented ads platform, helping really squeeze the rock for brands looking to drive performance, agencies looking to serve their customers across that. So we're not necessarily touching all tactics across all channels, which can contribute to some differentiation you might see again in consensus. And one way that we cut that is looking at the blend of the advertisers that make up our same store number. Some of the largest by volume across certain categories can tend to skew the mean towards some of the numbers you see, whereas we do want to call out that across some of the media analysis, especially within paid search and social, we saw a stronger kind of average advertiser, kind of more in line with what we're seeing in consensus from the broader street analysis of some of these platforms like Meta, like Google, right, where the mean in terms, and even seeing a softer number, for some of the mean advertisers, median advertisers in retail media. So seeing that in paid search, right, up 4% in the median, and social up 16%. So for that average advertiser. And as we look at the pricing volume by channel, really retail media was the only channel to kind of maintain the growth through increased ad volume versus kind of price hikes. We can look at search spend being down with kind of a flat click price, with search CPCs down a few points. Social spend was able to eke up with a small kind of single digit impression growth, but CPMs down, kind of weighting that. So really the bright spot in pricing is focused on the growth that we're seeing in retail media, really from a volume perspective, without being purely driven by CPCs in the retail media channel.
And as you can see, this chart takes us back with ad pricing, meaning retail media and search CPCs or social CPMs, takes us back all the way to Q1 2022. And it's very easy to see on this chart that there's been some volatility, and that reflects what's going on in the greater world, of course. But the good news for marketers is you look to the right of the chart, the more recent data, including, starting around Q2 of last year until now, we're seeing a stabilization of those prices. And that kind of is very indicative of the maturity of the channel, the stability of the market. And how does this benefit you, the marketer, when you have more, when you can price out and think and plan based on how you think prices are going to be across the whole year? It helps you to plan across the whole year instead of waiting to see quarter by quarter if costs are going to go up, costs are going to go down. I think this trend's going to continue throughout this year, and that once again will be a good sign for marketers who can really just jump onto their channels, plan correctly, and worry about managing those spends versus where the bids are going to go up or down. And if you've been following our thought leadership throughout 2024, we've been tracking the rise of commerce media. We think of how media sometimes in just retailer environments, whether that's on pure retail media, which of course is totally in those environments, or paid search, the shopping channels and Performance Max, or the advanced shopping campaigns that you see on Meta. That's really driving more of the growth. As you can see here, the top bar of each of these are the total growth for each channel. But as you can see, these other formats, the Amazon DSP, Performance Max, etc., those are growing at a higher rate. Maybe not completely moving the needle because they're a smaller part of the entire pie for those channels. But certainly, we're seeing this drive toward commerce media, and the commerce formats will definitely grow over time.
It's an interesting transitional time for some of these AI-based placement models like PMax and Advantage Shopping Campaigns Plus. So we'll hear more about that in the paid search and paid social sessions, as well as the influence of upper funnel media within retail media, which is a good segue into our first major channel section, which will focus on retail media. So, at a glance, increase across the board at 23% year over year in 4Q with 18% quarter over quarter growth. We saw some of the click-through rate decline, which tracks with increased focus on upper funnel tactics, where you're going to see many fewer clicks against the broader impressions, and in different tactic altogether, as there's a broader blend in the advertiser base, especially with the volume that Amazon drives in particular for upper funnel media. Looking at that spend, similar to last quarter, most of this spend growth came from more clicks, more volume, rather than inflation in costs, which was only up 3% year on year. So we saw a lot more volume, a lot more impressions, much faster than clicks or spending itself, which is consistent with the emphasis we're seeing on upper funnel media through the DSP.
And as we look at month over month retail media spending all the way back from October of last year, you'll see a trend about the bigger event months across retail media. So there has been some talk for some time that like the Cyber 5 days in November, you can see the big spike in July for Amazon Prime days. Those might be flattened out a bit because we're living in an era where there's sales all year round. But consumers are still jumping at those days. We see that with click-through rate, we see that with conversion rate, but also, of course, with spend. So this seems to be a trend that's going to continue. These are big moments, the Amazon Prime Day in the summer, and of course, your key shopping days in Q4. So takeaway for marketers thinking about 2025, make sure you're really ready for those big months to really spend and take advantage of consumer interest. And then as we look at the actual, nitty gritty here, impressions, clicks, spend, etc., what you see here is that spend increase, and that correlated to more clicks and more impressions. Why? Because CPCs were relatively flat. To me, as a marketer, I think that's a really good thing. The fact that marketers can scale up their programs, take advantage of those big deal days, take advantage of times throughout the year, but do it efficiently. So what we've seen in the past sometimes in some channels during the big spend hikes is that CPCs jump too because the auction gets saturated, there's more competition, and of course then marketers then end up paying a lot more than they would on off-peak times. But the cool thing about what we saw in Q4, spend goes up, clicks and impressions go up, but CPC the same. So that might tell us that there's definitely plenty of inventory out there, and marketers are finding ways to stay efficient as they scale up their spend. Good indicator here for the market.
Thanks, Josh. A couple high-level questions I'll address. This is global data. I will say, by and large, most of the volume is going to be AMER and EMEA in terms of our index. And then another question was broadly around, kind of meta numbers versus kind of their reporting on the street. There's a few different things that go into that. We'll get into it a little bit more in the social setting, and it does have to do with some of the way that our largest advertisers move the needle in the index compared to a broader average you'll see from one of these platforms, as well as the typical tactics our platform will address versus some of the reach and frequency and branding tactics you'll see broadly that may not be leveraged through a platform like ours, as well as a shift to some of the different, the different AI-based placement types like Advantage Plus shopping campaigns. So we'll get into that in the social section. But continuing on with the retailer comparison, Amazon was leading the charge from a CPC perspective with 6% growth year over year, reflecting kind of some of the DSP adoption, right, with fewer clicks through the kind of the display channel. The outlier really here, though, too, is seeing Walmart really start to take their, call it fair share and rapid growth from a spend perspective with a 30% year-on-year change in spend, with, click volume solidly up within Walmart and call it the rest of retail, with Amazon certainly representing the largest volume here from a clicks perspective, growing at, about 2/3 the rate, of Walmart and the rest of retail. In terms of looking at spending trend, quarter on quarter over the last five, by kind of major tactics, right? The offsite display kind of continues to be the fastest growing tactic within the retail media channel. And even though sponsored products representing most of the volume in the channel, is still solidly contributing to the spend growth, across the last few quarters. But certainly the offsite display and then the costly kind of CTV ad types that are within that are certainly underpinning some of the indexed growth. And when you look at the kind of average CPC by campaign type, Amazon DSP's prices have fluctuated quite a bit. If you look at that red line since the end of Q3, really, which marks the time when they released the Prime Video ad-supported tier, and releasing all that inventory, definitely shifted the auction dynamics and the cost, but the supply has really been met with demand over the last year, which showed 20% growth roughly compared to about 7% growth for sponsored products during the same amount of time. So that explains some of the nuance there in an otherwise kind of standard growth that we would expect in costs. And then in terms of conversion value, we're seeing that a lot of this growth, as we've mentioned before, isn't just in CPC increases, but in conversion volume, in click volume. So there's a lot of value coming into the Amazon space as they've really kind of spun up the flywheel here and figured out how to tie together their ad load with the other dynamics of their auction. And given that conversion rate outpaced the CPC growth, the conversion volume is very strong.
And conversion also beat the spend growth as well, which tells us that our marketers are getting more out of their spend. This to me is one of the most telling charts in the entire presentation about retail media. If you look at Q4 2023, the furthest left set of bars, that's the index. So we're indexing from Q4 2023. That's our baseline. As we move through the year, of course, spend drops a little as we get to Q1, Q2, and it starts to increase over Q4. But look at the light blue bar. The conversion value staying right in line with spend, and you can see that reflected in the red line, which is ROAS. So it's one thing to increase spending and keep your CPCs flat and down and inefficient, but that really doesn't matter. I mean, marketers are willing to spend double, triple, whatever, if they can get the return from that investment. And so here we're seeing that return is staying right where it is. It's no wonder why retail media keeps chugging along as the fastest growing channel in digital advertising. When you look at what's going on with retail media in terms of the share of spend across different campaigns, of course, for a long time, sponsored products have been the most dominant ad type within this channel. Sponsored listings, that's where everything started, and everything is growing from there. But if you look at the pie chart on the left, it looks like Pac-Man's opening wider this time. The dark blue, of course, is sponsored products, still the majority of spend going to sponsored product ads. But we're starting to see other ad types, sponsored brands, DSP, take on more and more of that of the spending. I remember this same chart some years ago. You saw nearly 80 or even more % of spend going to sponsored products. So this to me shows the maturation of the channel. Marketers are starting to realize how to use the different ad types, formats, placements to their advantage, and in a more full funnel way, rather than just focusing their spend at the bottom of the funnel.
And we can look at what underpins that, back to the, one of the questions, and thanks, Youssef, for that, what underpins some of this growth, right? And we are an enterprise platform, so typically an agency with lots of clients or an enterprise brand holding company will leverage our platform. So what's driving the growth within retail media? It's largely the large CPGs that have, the brand coffers to scale spend through Amazon's DSP, through their CTV channel. versus the contributor of the non-CPG, or looking regionally, right? Amer being the largest region for Amazon is contributing an outsized amount at 17% compared to 6% in the rest of the world. And sponsored products, to Josh's point, still with the volume that they command, is still an area for growth driver and spend compared to other campaign types. And certainly, you could compare CPG and the largest CPGs as the largest vendors and sort of first-party vendors on the Amazon platform compared to kind of sellers and long tail that through our platform are largely going to be addressed by agency. And if we look at those plotted a different way, right, you can kind of see this sort of center of gravity aligning those different vectors, right? The CPG advertiser type, the region, the vendor versus seller within the Amazon marketplace, and the sponsored products as the driver. And it kind of when mapped against overall CPC, you can kind of see that there is a center of gravity across those. Hard to distinguish between those details.
Yeah, and the next place people go, of course, after Amazon ads is Walmart, and it's firmly the number two retail media platform, number one in our hearts. But as you can see, sponsored brand ads quarter over quarter are actually growing in terms of percentage of spend against sponsored ads. And what that tells us is that marketers are looking for ways to kind of fill that funnel, fill that hopper, and looking toward other retailers like Walmart to be, center to that strategy. Um, and we see that with sponsored brands adoption. Although still a small percentage of total spend for retail media marketers on Walmart, as you can see that adoption is firmly there, around the 10% mark. My guess would be the more sophisticated programs that are looking, outside of just Amazon to fill the funnel, are thinking about where they can spend their money most effectively. Of course, sponsored products still the big piece, but sponsored brands on Walmart definitely will be something that we'll be looking for this year as marketers continue their multi-year approach to full funnel retail media rather than just at the bottom of the funnel. And, of course, sponsored brand ads are more expensive. I mean, as you can see from this chart here, almost twice or even a little bit more than twice in some occasions. But for marketers that know, we don't care what the price is as long as we get that return. And I would just, based on my own experience, think that sponsored brands are more than twice the impact of sponsored products. You get that big hero spot at the top of the page. You can kind of dominate a category based on your other competitors using sponsored brands ads. So for those of you out there that might be a little shy spending more money than you think, compared from sponsored brands compared to your sponsored product, especially on Walmart, I would just say benchmark that against your conversion activity and just see which one is the better value. I would imagine if you do that analysis, you're going to see that you should probably be spending a little bit more on sponsored brands with Walmart.
Thanks, JD. And one of the questions we got is about our Amazon DSP growth, primarily about the opening of Prime Video. Is that what we mean by offsite? Prime Video has certainly unlocked a huge amount of supply within Amazon's DSP, but Amazon's DSP covers the ComScore 2500 header bidded display inventory and video inventory across a variety of different CTV channels, not just their own and operated. So Prime Video launching that certainly opened up $1 billion incremental gain for them, and a huge opportunity from an audience and demographic perspective based on the typical demographic for the free ad-supported tier. And then great question from Richard just about how marketers can effectively measure conversion within retail media. It's a big question. We can probably follow up on that one, but extremely deterministic within the walled garden. Especially full funnel channels like Amazon that also include a cloud-based marketing cloud to really analyze from every impression the contribution to the path to conversion within the channel. And we're seeing a lot more interesting analysis of multiple regressions run against especially upper funnel spend within retail media as to how it relates to potentially even other competitive retailer segments or club sales, et cetera. There have been a lot of interesting analyses done there, and it's an area we're leaned in on to try to help figure out the value of a dollar spent within a channel and its impact on potentially other conversion channels. So great questions. Thank you, guys. Oops, I'll go back. So, we don't need to beat the horse, but DSP is certainly growing the fastest within Amazon. We mentioned broadly some of those notes there. Still steady growth across sponsored products year on year. Certainly within sponsored brands, and a little bit of pullback in sponsored display, but as a blend, that's what's contributing to internal Amazon growth. And this share has been consistent kind of quarter on quarter, in terms of how much DSP spend relative to the total within Amazon. And looking at this kind of through the lens of CPC by ad type, certainly the jump in Q4 could be a big contributor from the costs going into DSP, which is a much lighter in terms of click volume, which is fairly on trend, but broadly kind of on trend line for the other campaign types. Certainly higher CPMs within, especially CTV, can drive, and especially competition there in Q4 can drive some of that jump that we see in the DSP average CPC quarter on quarter.
Yeah, if you go back to that slide just for a moment, if you noticed when we went through the Walmart, sponsored products for sponsored brands, it was almost double. But on Amazon, look at the value here, almost the same CPC cost. So if you're not using sponsored brands enough, you might rethink that for 2025. All right, let's go into some of the category analysis. I'm not going to go into each and every number here. You can download the report, or you'll get the report in an email link, or actually, I think our colleague Julia dropped it in the chat. So, but it is very important to go into what makes up the top line numbers, because we see, growth, one number for each channel as we're showing, but as you go deeper into the industry, you can see it varies widely. So, growth is where it's at. Everyone's up, but some industries are up more than others. And I once again encourage you to do a deeper dive into our data post this webinar to see where you fit against the category. Same thing, CPC, everything's, around where it should be, around where it's been, but by category, it changes. And finally, growth too. We have a bunch of float, but in this case, a couple industries really stick out. So food and grocery stick out, beauty and personal care. Really understand, beauty and personal care for the shopping season. Kind of interested in the food and grocery one. I don't know if that's a setup for next year, or maybe just trying to reach people that we're hosting for the holidays. And but interesting to me, food and grocery up tells me that they're using more retail media maybe than some of the other categories.
And in terms of the just sort of long-term year-on-year trends, we've seen the last couple of quarters really, clicks driving the growth. And in the previous 4 quarters before that, it was CPC inflation and, kind of cost driving growth. So we're sort of in this kind of pendulum swung back toward kind of value and conversion versus cost of click. And I think that's indicative of the expansion of inventory and full funnel strategies within the space. Amazon really tightening up their ability as one of the largest contributors to the overall number to drive value across their flywheel. And then in terms of, long compounded growth over time, prices are not growing as fast, but if you look at this blended out, compounded annually, the CPCs are still at their highest that they've been in the last 5 quarters. So it tracks with the focus on kind of the high cost upper funnel when you're looking at that blended with low funnel and through a CPC lens, which is not typically how folks are looking at the upper funnel media.
All right, let's dive into paid search trends for Q4. You're going to see kind of an overall theme here. Paid search, once again, the most mature channel in digital advertising, still the most popular. 35 to 40% of total budgets go to paid search. And so we see kind of a flat change in spending. We did see a drop in CPC, which is really good in Q4. I mean, that's the most competitive quarter yet. Year over year, marketers have been finding ways to be more efficient with their spend. That's the number that kind of jumps out for me on this slide. When we look at the overall trends and impressions, clicks on the next slide, and CPC. Once again, flat with spending and CPC and clicks. But look at, impressions. That's an interesting piece. We know that, when impressions drop from the same amount of spending, what we're seeing is usually a drop in click-through rate. While on one hand, that could be problematic because that could hurt quality scores. On the other hand, in paid search, we only pay for the click, so you get all those impressions for free. And every impression has some value if you think about, kind of advertising 101. But I don't think there's anything to be worried about. Just make sure that your click-through rate isn't dropping so low that your quality score is being impacted, and that's impacting total program value and performance.
And certainly the transitional nature of moving away from a broader spray and pray feed-based shopping program to some of the PMAX strategies that are going to shift impressions around to different tactics and really focus on the value of that.
Yeah, the mix is changing more than it has in probably a decade and a half. And then, so once again, sometimes the numbers don't tell the full story. The top line numbers don't tell the full story. If you look at the percentage of Sky accounts that actually did spend, nearly half of those accounts grew year over year and grew their spending year over year, which means we had a few large accounts kind of move the needle here a bit on our top line number. So very positive in this fact. We're seeing a shift in the way that marketers are approaching paid search with Performance Max and other opportunities. And still nearly half of our clients spent more in Q4 year over year. I mean, they're still spending. They're spending a lot in search, but just give some color to the top line number that we shared.
Yeah, and when we look at that on a monthly basis, there's some macro trends we've discussed, with the market and with our clients with the end of last year, and heard from our clients as well. There was a bit of a wait and see as to what might happen around the election cycle, which might contribute to some of the numbers you see in a softer November. But when you look at that, compared to the yellow 22-23 reference, less volatility in the drop off, after the Cyber 5, and certainly blending that too with a shorter holiday season could contribute to some of the numbers where, Cyber Monday was actually in December. So I think a few of those things contribute to some of the monthly spend we see. As we look at some of the core trends across key metrics, a drop in impressions as JD called out year over year, with solidly fair quarter-on-quarter growth, kind of befits the holiday. We see CPCs down slightly, but a better click-through rate. So this shift to PMAX from standard shopping might explain both the impression drop as well as possibly a slightly better performing mix based on the inventory that they're through their AI models blending into the campaign strategies.
Yeah, and if you go back for a second, if you look at
Sure.
CPC, I mean, the fact that search marketers could kind of maintain the CPC into Q4, I mean, just 4 or 5 years ago, and from the beginning of paid search up until 4 or 5 years ago, you always saw CPCs go way up and spike in Q4. So the fact that marketers are able to continue doing what they're doing just shows that they're getting smarter at what they're doing, and they know where the value lives.
And to continue to hammer down on the contributor to growth here, PMAX being the largest, but PMAX and branded keywords didn't quite make up for the drops that we saw in some of the standard shopping and non-branded keyword campaigns. So there's definitely this shift toward value, trying to keep, performance at the best possible cost as possible, but while, not wasting spend, I think is the theme we saw here. But certainly the PMAX and the branded keywords were leading the drive. In terms of key growth drivers, the max conversion value and PMAX again are kind of ushering in this transition in the approach to the channel, especially within shopping tactics and commerce tactics. So as they're slowly replacing some of those earlier options, we're starting to see their contribution be a little bit more outsized, and even seeing some of the tactics around local and health contributing positively compared to other industries. Local for us, right, isn't Google Maps campaigns, but more so the SMB or the multi-location outlets. And looking at this sort of another way, right, you look at the value derived and the lower cost to leveraging the max conversion value in the PMAX campaigns with that average lower CPC. And both those campaign types tend to lend themselves well to shopping tactics, which again tends to be the advertiser mix that leverages platforms like ours, again with our unique focus on commerce media broadly, versus some of the more expensive kind of health or local competitive segments that are commanding a much higher average CPC just by comparison.
Probably the number one question I get from the from folks about our data, especially our search data, is performance max. There's been a lot of innovation in the paid search channel in the last 5, 6 years, from RSAs, you know, AI-driven broad match, and all sorts of things. Performance max still is the thing that people are really talking about. If you look on the left-hand side, what you can see is that by percentage of accounts, which ones are using PMax and where the spend is going. So because the accounts, there's so many accounts using it, but they're really not dedicating more than 10-15% to PMax now, but it has been slowly rising. Look at the on the left chart, the dark blue bar. We can see it's slowly been rising in spend, now representing 16% of total paid search spend. We wonder where that's going to cap out. Now, the right-hand chart is what we really need to look at, and especially on the red line. So for the first part, for almost, 4 quarters, we saw a very flat CPC, which means that the auction wasn't being completely dominated by spend. But then we see this big hike in 2024 in Q2 and Q3, and CPCs are going up, and that just tells us that more marketers are getting interested. They're seeing value, so they're willing to bid a little bit more to try to capture a little bit more. I don't know what you're seeing on your side, but I would probably recommend that you look at your bids for 2025. And if you are using PMax, that you really kind of get a little bit more aggressive, because that seems to be what your peers are doing. As we look through the industry by industry, once again, I'm not going to go too deep into the numbers. You should do that yourself and look at your own category, because top line numbers tell one thing, but as you can see, paid search growth or spend is a little bit across the board. We can see that the consumer goods and the retail category spiked. And as you would imagine, tech telecom may have backed out a little bit to get away from maybe the holiday shopping season, where they can dominate the rest of the year and save more budget for the rest of the year. CPCs too go up and down. You're going to have to just check your own industry against these. Of course, with the higher spend, consumer goods and retail had actually, what was interesting, that they had the lower CPC costs. So they're really finding value. If you're in that category and consumer goods or retail, hopefully you're seeing the same thing. Could be driven by some of the other ad formats and the focus on commerce. Jobs and EDU actually had the highest CPCs in Q4, but they tend to have the highest CPCs anyway, so that's unchanged. And you can imagine that market, the jobs market, the EDU market, kind of flat across the board generally. And then growth by impact, same thing. Going to change varied based on what industry you're in. The jobs and EDU contributed most to year-over-year growth, but also health as well. So just for a marketer, make sure that when you're optimizing by your vertical. You're not just taking industry benchmarks, top line benchmarks, and kind of applying those widely against your own performance. Make sure you have numbers like these that can help you understand what's going on in your category.
Yeah, and then just if we zoom out a little bit, the long-term trends here are really a story of what's happening with CPC prices. It's clear that disinflation in click prices, with clicks remaining flat, is ultimately what is for our index driving down spend. And then looking at some of the long-term trends, really was the first time, in about 5 years that holiday season didn't kind of push core search marketing higher year on year. So sort of an interesting and anomalous Q4 that we saw, certainly with macro trends that were influenced, as well as some of the shifts that you see tactically and technologically inside the solutions that are available to marketers within paid search.
All right, we took a look at the retail media and paid search numbers, but what happened with paid social in Q4? Once again, a mature channel, similar story to paid search. Marketers know what to do, know what to expect. year over year spending was relatively flat. And as we look at but as we look at the next slide, we're seeing that the total spend is not telling the whole story. Once again, when we look at our number of accounts, the majority of accounts are actually spending more than they did than the top line numbers show. So we have a few big accounts that are kind of pushing that needle left and right. So just understand where things are going, and against other Meta versus all social. That also might be a very important thing for you to check out this year. It seems to be this is the year where some of those other players, especially TikTok, might be moving the needle a little bit more. Look at your paid social division um, by platform and make sure that you're kind of keeping up to where probably your peers are. And the main numbers, although if you can see here, nothing was plus or minus more than 10% either way. In fact, most of the key numbers here are plus or minus 5%, both for Meta as well as for the entire social category. So once again, mature category. Marketers know what to do here. They know how to plan for the holiday season, and they're chugging right along.
No, and similar to some of the search numbers, we were fair kind of quarter on quarter trends against the core metrics across impressions, clicks, spend, CPM, click-through rate, but flat and negative growth in those CPMs and the click-through rates kind of offset the single-digit growth that we saw in clicks and impressions. So netting at a roughly 2% core spend growth. And looking at that blended out across the month, tracks similarly to the macro detail that we discussed in SEM, but a much stronger December. So the wait and see November might have built up some pent up budget with kind of positive outcomes in terms of the lack of any kind of macro tumult coming out of the election in kind of the consumer behavior. And then certainly that holiday bleed over into December could also contribute to some of these month over month numbers and a slightly stronger December compared to what we saw in 2022 and 2023. And then looking at the different growth drivers across the funnel, right? Upper funnel tactics really led the charge in spending growth, very similar to retail media. And lower funnel strategies down 7%. And you kind of saw that blended into some of the detail around the different campaign types that underpin that, and some of the CPCs that are super efficient in shopping campaign types that are perhaps more AI driven. So isolating though the upper and middle funnel in the center here, you can see there's actually a strong indexed year-on-year lift from a spending perspective.
Yeah, and if we go even deeper into the top line numbers, into the various drivers, what we can see again reflects what Nick said. The upper and middle funnels where really the kind of the growth is coming from. If you were to ask me to interpret this chart, although you haven't, I will tell you, I think that the media mix is changing a little bit because of retail media. Retail media is growing so fast, and marketers are finding ways to enhance that channel by using other channels like paid social as to drive awareness, to drive discovery. So I think, and we think this trend is going to continue. Doesn't mean that you can't drive conversion activity on social. You absolutely can. But maybe one of the better ways to look at social moving forward is how it can drive more upper funnel, mid funnel awareness for the other channels. And if we look again to this chart, which it shows the same thing, the upper and mid funnel spending is kind of showing that marketers are taking more of a portfolio approach maybe to social than they have in the past, and finding ways to drive those things, knowing that retail media and search could probably pick up the interest as consumers search and as they go on to retail platforms, retailers and search. Social, once again, a great driver. You can, of course, target people by their demographics and various interest things, ways that you can't do. You got to wait on search, and retail media sometimes have to wait for the user themselves to initiate a trigger-based ad. But with social, you can find that audience and really hammer them without them needing to search. And then now TikTok. After Performance Max, I think TikTok is something that people ask me the most about. Like what are we seeing? What kind of adoption we're seeing? Well, it's easy to see here. Over the course of the last 6 quarters, 5 quarters, it's going up. And spending is the dark blue bar. Yes, it drops after a little bit here and there, but it stays relatively flat. What we did see is we included the final. This is really the only chart where we're showing January numbers so far, because of what happened this month with TikTok. And even, marketers knowing that this was going to happen probably in January from their Q4 planning. So, yes, we saw a slight drop in spending. Uh, the number of accounts actually using TikTok didn't really change. So that doesn't mean that they're giving up on it. They probably just planned a little bit smaller. And of course, the drop off from Q4 to Q1 is always there. But now TikTok is back. Yay. Everyone appreciates it, especially advertisers have been getting great numbers and return from TikTok. So, well, this will be one for us to keep an eye on, especially in our Q1 quarterly trends report we'll do in a few months here to see if TikTok rebounded and is actually accelerating the way that we thought it would.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, and then when we look at Meta through the lens of their AI-based advanced shopping campaigns plus, costs came up pretty significantly in Q4 as we see kind of the pretty steep jump quarter over quarter in CPM, which really was what underpinned the spending growth, within Meta's advanced shopping campaigns. And when we look at that share of accounts that are leveraging that, there's not much change in who's adopting, but when you look at the comparison, right, on Google, PMax, the penetration was 46% in Q4. So there's still steady adoption, but not bad for a newer player, newer campaign type in a pretty mature channel. And then looking at the lower funnel kind of short-term spending, shifts from dynamic product ads and kind of call it maybe a functional migration to kind of the sales objectives and advanced shopping campaigns. Plus, it could be what's accounting for softer year-over-year spending, especially within kind of lower funnel tactics in the short-term lens.
Maybe sounding a bit like a broken record here, but from retail media and paid search sections. But by industry, once again, not going to go through all the data points here, but you should definitely look at what your benchmarks are and see if your category is going up, going down. We did see that finance had the largest year-over-year increase. Travel had a bit of a jump, but certainly you'll have to take this category data back to what you're looking at on your side. That continues with CPM, although there is a bit of a cluster between around $6 to $8 that might be telling. But then you look at health way up there in terms of what they're willing to pay from a CPM standpoint. I think categories like that are looking to drive awareness. Other categories like retail categories, people are actually on searching themselves. But you might have to, if you're in the health category, kind of get in front of people and push your ads to where you want them to be. And then, in terms of growth spend, finance, once again, is the big one. And you've got CPG also spiking somewhat.
And when we again zoom back out and look at some of the long-term year-on-year trends, with impressions remaining flat and CPMs down the last couple quarters, it's really the underlying, kind of weather for what's driving the softer growth for paid search in a long-term view. And again, zooming farther back out, low CPMs really compared to what we saw in late 21 and early 2022 have been the biggest headwind to growth. Some of the newer publishers underlying, obviously discussing TikTok and so forth have seen really strong growth, but the volume there hasn't really kind of influenced the broader trends yet. But a lot remains to be seen. Again, based on the kind of trajectory we see TikTok on, some of the turnarounds that are happening with channels like Pinterest and their connections to the retail media space and partnerships with Amazon and other places that we expect we'll see a contributed growth, again, assuming there's the ability to have a continuation of TikTok advertising pending the next, kind of 90-day review since the ban.
All right, so let's wrap up. We'll look at some top line recaps of some of the insights we've shared. Nick, I'd love to get some of your opinions on this. But of course, the big winner or big growth channel, as we've said many times, was retail media, showed very strong top line growth. The more mature, it's still growing and as a channel and certainly maturing. At some day, we will potentially see it flatten out, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. But of course, with the more mature channels, search and social, we did see relatively flat. But as we saw when we looked into the data, nearly half of paid search and more than half of paid social accounts actually grew their spend in Q4. So a couple big accounts on our side and big clients on our side maybe move the numbers a little to the left, but still definitely plenty of growth in these areas. And then the shifting set of ad formats of the in all three of our digital channels. That's something to keep an eye on, whether it's moving to more AI focused or moving to more upper funnel, mid funnel. Seems like there is a shift in the air in the way that people are and the way that marketers are approaching their portfolio strategy. That might be because of retail media. I personally think it is. You can kind of rethink, your social advertising, your search advertising in terms of a full funnel approach when retail media has now become so big as what it is. It might be a better strategy to drive instead of, 5 years ago, marketers were really driving to their own site. Now they have the ability to drive to an Amazon or drive to a Walmart or a Target, where consumers really do like to transact. So we'll keep an eye on that, but it feels like there's some change in the air. And now that we're, a couple years past the pandemic and even the ad costs and click costs have kind of flattened, there might be something here. 2025 might be the year of change.
I mean, addressing some of the comments that came through, right? I mean, looking at some of the softness in Google search for us, right, compared to maybe what obviously broadly Google and Alphabet are reporting. It's syndromal, I would say, especially when you look at that through the kind of complex matrix of client mix and client size. This was why we brought up some of the analysis around our median versus mean, where we are seeing growth across kind of the average account. Some of the larger accounts, again, looking at this through the lens of what part of the funnel we typically address within search and Google specifically, given we're not full funnel like we are on top of Amazon, where we see all this growth on top of Amazon with our connection to the Amazon DSP and advertisers taking a full funnel approach there. Our approach to Google very much stops at where they might dive into DV360 or their DSP. So if you're a very large advertiser, depending on the category that you're in, especially in maybe finance or travel and hospitality and others, where if you're large by volume, you have this. If you don't like the economics within the performance channel, you can shift that budget into your upper funnel, and we might be blind to some of that. So that could be underpinning some of why we see some of the softness in the space, in addition to some of the trends that we see around how AI overviews might be affecting impressions, or how the AI-driven, campaign types like PMax might be driving lower cost performance compared to a more spray and pray approach to traditional shopping campaigns. So there's a variety of things that go into it. But again, looking at that median, you start to see that broadly across the board, the movement is in a direction that's more aligned with consensus for the channel. We had another question that was about where did TikTok ad spend get rerouted to during the one day it was down? Maybe did the next day when it came back up, but that's a good question and an interesting one, and certainly one we want to track, especially as we see the decline in TikTok spend. Certainly natural off of a Q4 to come down to where it was about 15%, I think, of total social so far in Q1. But tracking that based on, do we start to see an outsized share to Instagram with the Reels product as a hedge against what might happen in the next, 70, 75 days. We didn't outline Criteo specifically. There's a lot more of a blend, I would say, and call it the rest of retail number that we did outline in the retail media section. Specifically, I think there's a strong share within that rest of retail metric, so you can largely look at that as a good, kind of adjacent analog to an analysis on Criteo. I think in the future, it's a good call out to potentially think about, as that space becomes more kind of has a deeper depth of statistical significance that we can call out. And certainly we have limitations on what we can specifically call out with partners like that, and even certain retailers that don't want to be called out in the analysis, given it's not quite at the index volume that an Amazon and a Walmart are with 85% share of the market.
And given that Q4 really is a major indicator of what's going to happen in the year to follow, this is one of the more interesting QTRs we've done, I think, in a while, that's really showing that some sort of change, some sort of mix that's happening. So yeah, marketers 2025, you got to stay on your toes, and kind of keep checking out the benchmark information. That actually leads me to more research that we have and more resources we have here at Sky. I mentioned this at the top of the presentation, but our Sky Research Center is really packed full and chock full of really interesting stuff. We've got reports. We've got a new retail media, full funnel retail media report about what that means and kind of some tips and how to do that. We've got, like I said, our state of retail media, our fourth annual, our 2025 state of retail media is just getting the final touches and will be posted soon. It's as I mentioned, the longest running survey for the retail media channel, where we ask all sorts of things to marketers, like how were your results last year? What are your challenges? What would accelerate growth? Things about data clean rooms and AI. But we also have consumer surveys that we put out a lot. We really want to make sure that marketers understand where consumer behavior is headed, how consumers are thinking about the channels. Sometimes we get in our heads as marketers and we forget that the consumer really is driving things. So staying on top of that pulse is incredibly important. We put out this quarterly trends every quarter. For those of you who probably been on some of these before, and then we put out the monthly ones as too. And then let me just really, push down on that gold box, the custom research. We have, this report, over 1 trillion impressions, $8.6 billion in spend. We have a lot of interesting information that might be critical to your operations, whether you're an analyst, whether you're a marketer. And so we are open to doing custom research, especially for our clients.
And thanks, Josh, for everything. Thanks everybody for joining. This was the first time we did a blend of the analyst community as well as marketers. So we always appreciate any feedback. As we do follow up via email, please do get in touch. contact@skai.io. My name's Nich Weinheimer, Nich is the first name. Feel free to hit me on LinkedIn, or if you have any questions for Josh or me, we're more than happy to try to help guide you through our organization, or again, take your feedback. If there's anything we can do better, if there's research you want to see, to the degree that we can and we're legally able to, we'll do our best to try to bring that in. I'll send a Venmo around for anyone who is a good friend of Chris Costello, aka Kaz. We miss him dearly, and maybe we can all send him a nice departing gift. But again, thank you everybody for joining today, and that wraps up Sky's quarterly trends report. Thank you.